All right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and boy, oh boy, do I have a short special Shroud treat for you guys today. The D'Arcis Memorandum, challenging the ultimate Shroud skeptic, Hugh Farey. Perk up those ears, Hugh. This one's for you. All right, so I recently did a video debating a skeptical friend of mine, or we're friendly with each other, named Mike from Evil Christianity. And I also, in that show, as a bonus for my fan G-Hawk, responded to the arrogant and ignorant Fundy Shroud skeptic, the Godless Engineer. And at one point, the Godless Engineer referenced the dreaded D'Arcis Memorandum, which I promptly refuted him, just as a very brief, quick reaction video type thing.
Again, no historical records linking it to earlier periods. Even contemporary bishops, when it was first introduced in France, were calling it a forgery. They even cited the involvement of local artists. In 1389, Bishop D'Arcis wrote a detailed memorandum to Pope Clement VII, claiming that the image on the shroud was actually the invention of a local artist and not a miraculous imprint. He stated that an artist confessed to creating the image and accused the canons of the Church of Lorraine of perpetrating a fraud for financial gain. Even Bishop D'Arcis's predecessor, Bishop Henry de Poitiers, had reservations about the shroud. So it seems like even when the shroud first appeared in Lorraine, France, people were already doubting it. And there are even claims of an artist confessing to creating the shroud. So why do we invest 600,000 hours of research into something that was claimed initially to be an artist rendition? Seems pretty fucking dumb to me, but you know, I'm just a hick from North Alabama. You can only accurately date the shroud back to 1354 France. And even then, it was denounced by a local bishop as a forgery.
Typical skeptic, ignorant as heck, making his claims from supernatural skeptical stupidity syndrome. Obviously Satan-induced. So we can only accurately, says who? Says you're biased skeptics? No, nobody believes that. We can accurately date it back, all the way back to the 1st century in the book of Galatians, actually. So he's just wrong there. Totally clueless, of course, as usual. And then he makes this vague mention to the D'Arcis Memorandum. Oh man, I'm so tired of refuting that. Name a single PhD historian who believes that. It's a fraud, a proven fraud. Godless Engineer, you got to do better. You got to educate yourself before you speak. You have no clue what you're talking about. D'Arcis Memorandum is a proven fraud. We don't even know what the D'Arcis Memorandum even said in the first place, because our manuscripts date from the 1800s and they contradict each other. So we don't even know what the original Latin said for the document. Secondly, it's not signed or dated, meaning it was never sent or even perhaps even read by Bishop D'Arcis himself. It looks like it was signed by the scribe that wrote it out. And then he realized, this is complete horse trash. I'm lying and I'm going to damn my soul to hell by sinning in this way. So I'm just going to throw this in the garbage and never send it. That's what actual PhD historians, and even the ultimate Shroud skeptic Hugh Farey himself, admits happened. And he says this D'Arcis Memorandum evidence is garbage and rubbish. Only a fool could appeal to this as evidence that the Shroud is medieval. That's what was said between me and the Godless Engineer there. Now, enter the ultimate Shroud skeptic, Hugh Farey. As you can see right here on the left-hand side, this is Hugh Farey, probably the most knowledgeable Shroud skeptic in the world. And he saw fit to chastise me in my YouTube comments, insulting me, calling me all manner of things, from a flat earther to speaking nonsense and all this stuff that you usually get from a typical Hugh Farey when he's not too happy that his Shroud skeptical team is not looking so good. Because obviously in my refutation video, I utterly refuted the ignorant and arrogant Shroud skeptic, the Godless Engineer. And Hugh Farey doesn't like that. He doesn't like when the pro-Shroud time side comes out on top. It bugs him, I think. And so he has to get involved and muddy the waters a bit, or take away from a victory on the pro-Shroud side. And yeah, he threatened me by saying he would take out his big 16-inch guns and stuff like that. So by writing a scathing blog post about me. So first of all, in terms of the blog post, I say bring it on. I'm not afraid of you or your 16-inch big guns. You're allowed to write a blog post on anything, anytime. So yeah, I just want to say, bring it, Hugh. I'm not afraid, and I welcome your big guns, as you call them. I've seen what your big guns have to offer. I dare you to write a blog, giving the facts as you see them on the D'Arcis Memorandum. But I'm not going to get into that necessarily. But I have a specific challenge for Hugh Farey, the Shroud skeptic. If you write these blogs and you bring out your so-called big guns, then I want to specifically challenge you on a couple of issues. One of which is going to be based on what I call the D'Arcis Memorandum Bibliographical Test Challenge for Hugh Farey. And this comes from the fact that I mentioned, well, we have two variant folio manuscripts of the alleged D'Arcis Memorandum. And I just suggested to Hugh in a provocative way and asked him for his evidence. Surely Hugh Farey, the most knowledgeable Shroud skeptic in the entire world, isn't just mindless and appealing to authority, right? He's got reasons why he believes the D'Arcis Memorandum actually date to 1389 and between 1390, that they're actually original, that D'Arcis himself wrote them in his own hand, and or perhaps had a scribe or law clerk of his at that time write them. Surely that's not just something that Hugh mindlessly accepted. He must have evidence or reasons, and I simply asked him for that. Instead, I got nothing but appeal to authority and mindless ad hominem insults, calling me a flat earther. How could you even raise such a question? It's so ridiculous. I'm calling you out, Hugh. Your defensiveness has alerted me that there must be something here. Therefore, I'm going to be challenging Hugh Farey to prove his skeptical claims. That the two folios we have of the D'Arcis Memorandum today are both probably originals, written by D'Arcis himself, or his scribe or law clerk. And thus, historians date these specific manuscripts to 1389 to 1390. Great. Hugh Farey, this is what I say to you. Prove it, skeptic. Prove it. Don't assert it. Prove it. Okay, so before I get into the challenge, there is some preliminaries I want to tackle here, basically in the form of a request for you, Hugh, when you write your blog, because I asked you in the YouTube comments, and you refused to answer, saying, oh, I'm not going to be held on record, stuff like that. So, Hugh, I have claimed that you yourself admit the D'Arcis Memorandum is garbage and rubbish evidence. That you say skeptics should not use it. It's foolish, a misjudgment, an error in logic, an error in wisdom, discernment, let's say. That's what foolishness means. It's the opposite of wisdom, to use it. And instead, Shroud skeptics, you've consistently said, should rather appeal to the papal bull of Clement. You ignore the other ones, but you focus in on one of them that suits your fancy, whereby the Shroud is called a representation and therefore not real. And you've repeatedly over the years always said this. Memo's garbage, skeptics, don't use it. Just focus on this papal bull. That alone is sufficient to represent the case. Now, as I understand it, Hugh, you are making, in terms of the D'Arcis Memorandum itself, now you're changing your tune. Now you're making at least three claims, I guess. If you're affirming the D'Arcis Memorandum, there are at least three claims that I care about. So number one, the shroud is medieval in origin in the 1350s or thereabouts, or maybe at the earliest, the late 1200s. Two, the images were painted or artistically created by an artist. And three, D'Arcis's predecessor, Bishop Henry, held an official inquiry or investigation around the 1350s, whereby the artist confessed to cunningly painting and creating his fraudulent Shroud of Turin images. Those are the three claims that the D'Arcis Memorandum makes that I'm interested in. But beyond, there are other claims beyond that. There's a lot in there. And now I've actually clipped Hugh Farey from what I believed was him explicitly stating on previous shows where he disavows the evidence from the D'Arcis Memo in favor of this earlier papal bull from the anti-Pope Clement. So it looks like he's agreeing fully with pro-Shroud historians like Dr. Cheryl White or Jack Markwart, among others, who claim that nothing can be proven from the memo given various problems with it. And I just want to play some clips, at least backing up why I say this, despite Hugh now claiming I'm misrepresenting him.
From a historical point of view, no, I'd like to ignore the D'Arcis Memorandum. I'd like to pretend it didn't happen, that the bloke who wrote it didn't exist, and if he did, he didn't send it, and all the rest of it. What I will go straight to is the papal bull of Clement VII, who said, if this shroud is going to be displayed, it must be announced in a loud voice that it is not the burial shroud of Christ. First reference we have to the shroud in France is a bull by Clement VII, dated June 1389, in which he requests that the object, which is a representation of the shroud, may be exhibited, but it must be exhibited under the proviso that it is announced in a loud, clear voice that it is not the shroud of our Lord. Then, as far as I can see, if that was in June, it's generally thought that D'Arcis wrote his memorandum towards the end of 1389 or the beginning of 1390. So Clement made all his instructions before D'Arcis wrote the memorandum. So it's not particularly relevant to Clement's instructions whether D'Arcis sent his memorandum or not. There is some doubt about whether he was in a rage and rushed it, got it all copied out, and then thought better of it and decided not to send it at all. Doesn't really matter.
Authenticists are kind of in this corner, and I think their story would be a lot better if they would just kind of make a lot of historical sense, given what the historical circumstances are at the time. I could buy it myself personally if the story was that, and you'll probably use this in the future, but if the story was that Geoffrey got busy with the war after 1354, and that's when the dean kind of took over, and he had those exhibitions in Geoffrey's absence. But what would kill that, why you can't go there, I think, is because then if Bishop D'Arcis got upset about it over that period of time, he would be writing that letter of praise at the end of May. So it's kind of a conundrum that I think that non-authenticists have about the very beginning of the history of the shroud, when they finally admit the shroud exists, that authenticists don't have. Our story is rather simple. We used to have a show here in the United States that was called The Tonight Show way back when, and Johnny Carson would always say, if you buy the premise, you'll buy the bit. And there's just a false premise here. If you buy the authenticist premise, that Geoffrey de Charnay is the owner of the Shroud, got his church ready for exhibitions, and was ready to go the next couple of years, and there were no problems with them, and that's why the Bishop Henry praised them, praised Geoffrey, and praised the cult that was going on. This all makes historical sense, but it kind of then puts, and when I say puts the lie to the D'Arcis Memorandum, I'm not trying to indicate that D'Arcis lied necessarily. I just think it was a bunch of poor information that he had, that now that we're studying it, it just doesn't make very much sense in historical context.
Yeah, you make some good points.
Okay, so that was from a previous show, from Shroud Wars Panel Review Part 16E, plus my response to Hugh Farey's blog Bayesian Balderdash, whereby he claimed the D'Arcis Memorandum, in jest, he claimed the D'Arcis Memorandum was good evidence and it proved beyond all reasonable doubt that the Shroud is medieval, 95%. Hugh Farey, I said, well, that's total BS, and I played these clips showing that Hugh Farey actually thinks the memo is garbage and rubbish evidence. Don't use it. The papal bull is where it's at. That's what proves the Shroud is a medieval artistic fake in Hugh Farey's opinion, not the D'Arcis Memorandum. That's too controversial. That evidence sucks and has been destroyed by so many historians that Hugh doesn't think it's good enough to use. And that's what he really thinks in his blog, Bayesian Balderdash, where he supports using the D'Arcis Memorandum. That's just a farce for him to make a point about using probability theory and stuff like that to studying the Shroud. And he had later admitted to me after watching this show that I was correct, that his blog and his affirmation of the D'Arcis Memorandum was just in jest to make that point about probabilities. If I was misrepresenting Hugh, and we know he saw this show, that was his opportunity to say, well, no, you've got it wrong. What I was saying in these clips wasn't that the D'Arcis Memorandum is garbage evidence, yet maybe he was saying, yes, I prefer the Clement Bull, but I think the D'Arcis Memorandum is weak, but still good evidence, or something like that. That here was his opportunity to reach out and say, hey, Dale, you're misunderstanding me, or something. But he didn't do that. Look, here are some more clips that I didn't play in this episode. Again, substantiating this notion that Hugh agrees the D'Arcis Memorandum is very problematic and thus probably shouldn't be used as evidence. These come from various clips in his debate with Jack Marquardt here.
I think you said, Hugh, that the D'Arcis Memorandum is not as important as it used to be. Back in 1900, it was a very important thing because we didn't have carbon testing. And so the idea that somebody finds this document, and a bishop at that time said all these things about the Shroud that were of a negative nature, 8 years, at least until Stirk came along. But I don't think it really means that much today.
All right, cool. So
yeah, I think the papal bulls of Clement VII are the critical thing.
The only thing that matters is that allegation true? Is it provable? Is it credible? And I think, given what we know of the circumstances, it simply is not. And I actually think that is why D'Arcis never sent the memo to the Pope. You know, the Pope was going to get, in his dreams, in D'Arcis' dream, maybe the Pope was going to get this and shut down the showings. I don't think so. I think that the best he could have gotten is some kind of papal commission to look into what D'Arcis made serious allegations. Now, let's prove them. What is your proof? For you to write that letter, and what is D'Arcis' proof? What did he have? What could he have? We don't know. So because of that reason, it just doesn't get any credibility.
But in spite of that, the Pope nevertheless decides that we must announce in a very loud voice that this is not the Shroud, and do away with all the trappings that it was surrounded with. So
yeah, I know that, and so your implication is it was because D'Arcis sent the memo and the Pope got the memo, and this goes back to the fallacy that was created by Chevalier. You know, Chevalier knew, he was a very, very smart man. I think he may have been a lawyer, Teddy, but he was a very, very smart man, and he kind of evaluated the proof that he had. And he knew that this memorandum was just something that was found in the church records or the diocesan records, wherever they got it. They got it from the Bibliothèque Nationale, I believe. But he also knew there was not a papal record in which showing that Clement VII received it. So Chevalier says, I know how I'm going to have people like Hugh Farey in the future make this equivalence. He puts on the document, without telling anybody that he's just doing it, he puts end of 1389. That's how he dates the document. He doesn't tell anyone why he's putting the end of 1389. And actually, he has no factual basis to do it, because if you were just looking at the document, you would say, D'Arcis is talking about an event that happened on August 5th, and he's not talking about any events that happened after August 5th. It's obviously was written by him in August. And one other thing on that, Hugh, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the D'Arcis Memorandum, D'Arcis says to the Pope, I hear that you've entered an injunction of perpetual silence against me, and I hear that you've threatened me with excommunication. I don't know if that's true because I haven't received the papers yet. So that further dates it that Pope Clement did this at the end of July, and whenever D'Arcis is writing this, he still hasn't gotten the confirming paperwork on this. But in any event, that was Chevalier's canard that he used. He just put this date, and then everybody that read it said, oh, this great churchman historian, Chevalier, he's confirmed that this was written at the end of 1389. So that's exactly why Clement issued his bull and said, among other things, you now have to announce it's a representation in a loud voice. So let me get...
No, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say I don't think Descharny ever sent that document at all. I just D'Arcis, but the fact remains that when the Shroud was proclaimed authentic, it was suppressed, and only when the Shroud was not proclaimed as authentic was it permitted to be carried on.
So Hugh, that Shroud that they have in Turin now, do you think it's authentic?
No.
Okay, and I do. I think Teddy does. I think Dale does. So when the Shroud was brought forward in Liray in the 1350s, how could any of those people know whether it was authentic or not? What pope could possibly know that? Nobody. What is this obsession you have with whether people in the 1350s were saying it was or was not real, when in all likelihood they didn't know, but in their beliefs after seeing it, the ones who saw it, the ones who came and saw it, there were certain people who formed the opinion that it was real. Those pilgrims did not keep coming out to Liray because they didn't think it was real. You know, they thought it was real, and then they told other people, and they came. So there were a number of people thought it was real. But what difference does that make in our debate? Are we just going to number how many people think it's real versus the people that don't think it's real? It doesn't get you to the resolution of the issue, does it? No.
Well, in that case, we could say that the whole of the correspondence around the turn of the 13th, 14th, 15th century is irrelevant to whether the Shroud is actually real or not. We then have to go to other evidence, which would have to be entirely
right.
I'm
fine with throwing out the evidence of the late 14th century if it's there, because I don't think it really talks to it. But I think that we're here because, like as I understand how Dale approaches this, you as the non-authenticist have the burden of showing that the Shroud is medieval, and you are coming forward, and it seems in a very reluctant manner, but you're coming forward to extol the D'Arcis Memorandum at that time. But I'm fine with throwing out the D'Arcis Memorandum. I don't think it really is that meaningful.
Oh, sorry, Dale. We've been here for hours, and we've decided that it's not really important after all. No, well,
we've shown the audience why it is not important.
Yeah.
We've exploded that fraud, so to speak. Yeah.
I think both sides would Well, no, the non-authenticist would certainly say that the correspondence regarding the exhibition in the 14th century is not the biggest arrow in the bow. It's just one of them. And I think you were sort of arguing against yourself with this, the inquiry of Bishop Henry, because you first of all said, well, we've got absolutely no records of the inquiry, which is perfectly true, but then we haven't got records of many things. But then you said, well, surely there would be people who remember the records and they would have spoken out. And the answer is, well,
just if there was an inquiry.
Yes, if there was an inquiry, they would have spoken out, and they didn't. But then why should they? If they agreed with D'Arcis, there would be no reason for them to speak out.
But they never saw D'Arcis' memo or his letter.
No. I mean, I don't think it was. It doesn't mean that there was or there wasn't.
But I mean, they might have come out of the woodworks had they seen that D'Arcis was making a claim that there were these investigations.
You mean they might have come out? They might have come out and said, no, there wasn't.
Well, I mean, we don't know. I mean,
no, we don't know. I mean, that's the thing. So
that could be a reason why he didn't ever make it public.
I think we should keep in mind that D'Arcis was a lawyer before he was ever a priest. That was his background. And, if you're a lawyer and you're going to make out a case, which is basically what his memo was, to make out a case to the Pope, you're going to invoke the evidence that you have. You're not just going to make bold, unsupported charges. And so this is the great mystery about it. If there was a council held or there was an investigation, he could point to a single witness, a single advisor who was a part of that, and say, if you need any further proof, you can call on, this great man of the law or this great theological advisor that happened at the time. It's one of the things that damages the veracity, the credibility and veracity of that memorandum, especially coming from a lawyer, somebody who practiced law before he was in
probably even back then they may have had the rule where there's what we call hearsay within hearsay, because D'Arcis is saying that Poitiers said that an artist who's not even named said. So you've got double hearsay.
Well, it's doubtful he ever spoke to Poitiers, because Poitiers died in 1370, and D'Arcis came to Troyes in 1373. So it's kind of doubtful that he talked to Poitiers, which would make it double hearsay. So you're probably into at least triple or quadruple hearsay in terms of what somebody heard somebody say.
Probably
and
based on nothing but sheer rumor.
Yeah, I mean, that's giving him the benefit of the doubt that he actually heard this and people actually said it. But there's also the possibility that he made it up out of whole cloth or he exaggerated. We just don't know. That's why I think you have to do what we tried to do a little bit here today, and that is look at the substantive veracity of what he's saying as opposed to the surrounding circumstances. When it gets to the surrounding circumstances, we're making a lot of guesses and suppositions, and we're trying to bring historical context to that. But I think that the language itself in the memo leaves itself open to a lot of attack.
All right, so there are the clips. You can see the ultimate Shroud skeptic, Hugh Farey, readily going, yep, to everything the pro-Shroud experts are saying and contradicting this D'Arcis memorandum as garbage and rubbish evidence. And Hugh is desperate to shift the focus away from the D'Arcis memorandum and focus, but we got the papal bulls. Let's just focus on that. That's really the good evidence. That's at least those documents are arrows in our quiver, as he said. But it seems like he doesn't want the D'Arcis memorandum. He wants to throw that in the garbage. He's hoping skeptics will forget about it. These are the clips. This is why I say that. But yet Hugh comes on saying I'm misrepresenting him. So, look, Hugh, you've been a bit Weasley and contradicting yourself, at least seemingly so. So here is my official request. If you're going to bring out your big guns and write a blog on the D'Arcis memorandum, the first thing I want you to do is state clearly and unambiguously, once and for all, because I'm going to use that from now on and quote you, What is your belief about the D'Arcis Memorandum as historical evidence? Do you think it is good or bad evidence on the preponderance of evidence? Should Shroud skeptics use it or not? Yes or no, kind of thing. And you can clarify if you want. The second part of that challenge, the same challenge you give to Jack Marquardt, where you say, well, pro-Shroudies accept some bits of what's reported in the D'Arcis Memorandum as being true. And yep, that's correct. Same about me. But they reject other bits, like about the inquiry and that an artist confessed and stuff like this. But they'll admit that there was this controversy going on with Bishop D'Arcis and stuff like that. I'm putting I challenge you in this blog, when you clearly and unambiguously state your position on whether the D'Arcis Memorandum is good or bad evidence. Again, good on the basis of the preponderance of evidence. Do you think skeptics can use the D'Arcis Memorandum in isolation in itself and say, yes, probably there was an inquiry and an artist confessed to creating the Shroud, and it was held by Bishop Henry, his predecessor, and this is how we know the Shroud came into existence around the 1350s or thereabouts, and it was a fake created by an artist. That's what I care about. But beyond that, all of the claims, remember Jack Marquardt in your debate listed about 7 to 9 claims that the D'Arcis Memorandum makes. And you asked him on each one of those, do you believe it? Do you think this is a lie or not? Or is this false or not? I'm putting that straight to you in your blog, Hugh, your big gun blog. Do you think each and every single one of these elements in the D'Arcis Memorandum, I want you to label it. Is this probably historical or is this probably false? For each of those elements. So that is the preliminary request for your blog. And again, I'm telling you up front, make this your clarifying thing, because I'm going to appeal to this from now on. So now is your chance, Hugh. Clarify. Stop complaining that I'm misrepresenting you. I'm asking you right here, right now, make it clear, unambiguous, and I promise I will use that and quote you from that going forward. Okay. Now, that's just the preliminary. Let's get into the main issue that I wanted here for the D'Arcis Memorandum Bibliographical Challenge to Hugh Farey. Now, Hugh claims it is akin to being a flat earther to deny or even to doubt or question, as I was doing with you, whether only 2 manuscript copies of D'Arcis Memorandum that we have in existence are in fact the original autographs dating back to 1389 or 1390, as written in Bishop D'Arcis's own hand and or perhaps by his associated scribe or law clerk or something like that at the time. I raised the question. Now, here's the thing, Hugh. The D'Arcis Memorandum is a skeptical claim. It's a negative evidence. It's the skeptic, aka Hugh Farey, saying, I know for a fact that the Shroud is probably medieval. Why? Because the D'Arcis Memorandum says so. That's my evidence. Great. If you claim the D'Arcis Memorandum is good evidence on the preponderance of evidence, then you've got to defend that. And I challenge you to prove your claim that the 2 folio manuscripts that we have in possession, the only 2 extant manuscripts in existence for what the D'Arcis Memorandum says, is on a balance of probabilities actually the original autographs written by D'Arcis and or his scribe or whatever, written in 1389 to 1390. What reasons or evidence do you have to prove that? Because when I asked you in the thing, all you had was, oh, you're a flat earther, you can't even ask this question. I can ask any question I want. The rational critical thinker asks every question. It's on you who has the burden of proof. The Shroud skeptic is the burden of proof. Prove that these are actually original. Don't just assert it, prove it. And it's not good enough to go, well look, all the other pros, Jack Marquardt believes they're originals and everyone you know thinks it's an original. Cool. What's the reasons? I want you to prove that. Maybe it's a false assumption. Maybe we've all made false assumptions. Sometimes the pro-Shroud crowd in their haste, grant skeptical assumptions without due warrant on their end. And looking at the literature, I haven't seen this specific issue addressed by anyone. So I want to raise the question, and I want you to look into it and provide the evidence. What reasons do we assume that these 2 folio manuscripts in France actually are the originals written by D'Arcis, or written back in 1389 by his scribe? That's the challenge, Hugh. Again, you have to provide this on the basis of sound reason and evidence that secular historians would, or at least could, hypothetically, rationally accept, according to the general rules of modern historiography. So, for example, things like, okay, was there a carbon-14 dating test? Obviously, no, there wasn't, so you can't appeal to that. Or maybe utilizing calligraphy, right? So you can assess the handwriting. And in fact, Brother Bruno, who I'm going to be quoting later, did assess the handwriting. And unfortunately for you, skeptic, kind of said, well, actually, we don't know. But anyways, here's another potential basis. Look at the style of the writing, the calligraphy. Are both these manuscripts written in the same handwriting style, written by the same person? That's something courts can do, and we can assess. And or, okay, do these 2 manuscripts match other documents that are known to have been written in the 1300s by D'Arcis and or D'Arcis' scribe or something like that? That would be another thing that I would accept as rational evidence. Not just going, only a flat earther would ask that question. No, evidence, Hugh. Evidence. That's the challenge. Good reasons, not insults and ad homs. Those are illogical reasons. Here's another thing. The style of the Latin. I don't know. Does it match medieval Latin written in the late 14th century versus later 15th century or 16th century Latin or something like that? Is there some kind of language or internal evidence or external evidence that can allow us to actually date these 2 folios in particular that we have in existence and prove that they are, number one, dating back to the 14th century, and number 2, that they are probably the original autographs written by D'Arcis himself or his scribe or clerk. All right. Now, unfortunately for Hugh, I've actually looked into this claim from the world's experts and various Shroud historians, including people like Brother Bruno, who've held these folios in their hands. Hugh's not done that. He's looked at these folios with his own eyeballs and confirms a lot of what I'm saying. And I'll include his paper on my blog for people to read everything about the problems. But I'm just going to present certain facts that relate to the folios, because that's what I care about. This bibliographical test. Now, the bibliographical test is basically about the originals versus later manuscript copies, right? So it asks two questions. How many manuscripts do we have that are extant today, that exist today? Obviously, there are only 2 in existence. So that's already off to a bad start. Secondly, how close in time, chronologically speaking, are these manuscripts dating from, these 2 folios, in relation to the originals? Now, the claim from Hugh Farey is that, well, these are the originals. So that's very good. That would pass the bibliographical test, if true. But you can't just assert they're true. Again, you need to prove that this is probably true at the very least. And so far, I've seen nothing from Hugh Farey on that front. Hence the challenge. Remember, Hugh, you alone have the burden of proof here. I'm just saying, well, what if? It's an undercutting defeater. You have the burden of proof to prove that these are in fact originals and or they date to the 14th century, as opposed to later manuscript copies written anytime from 1400 up until the 19th century, which is when we have the first confirmation of their existence. Here are a list of facts that when I looked into it, so I'm helping you out here, Hugh. I'm giving you a start. Now, basically, fact number 1, this is the undisputed history of the D'Arcis Memorandum. So number 1, the D'Arcis Memorandum, as read and utilized by modern Shroud skeptics like Hugh Farey in the 20th and 21st centuries, is not a real historical document that existed prior to the dawn of the 20th century. Instead, the text, as known and read by skeptics today, is nothing more than a fraudulent invention by a fellow Shroud skeptic named Ulysses Chevalier, who in the year 1900 amalgamated two earlier variant readings of the memo and basically lied and pretended, see, this is the document, and he even fraudulently wrote in the date, end of 1389. Now, okay, who are skeptics? Just for example, I found that all modern Shroud skeptics, even ones that are historians or ecclesiastical historians, it's mostly ecclesiastical historians who are skeptics in the know. So, for example, one of these skeptics is the French priest Victor Saxer. He was the rector of the Pontifical Institute of Christian Archaeology and president of the Pontifical Committee for Historical Sciences in Rome. Now, he claimed to be a student in this field, meaning he was a student in 14th and 15th centuries AD. He had expertise as an ecclesiastical historian, according to his claims. However, far from arguing from some unpublished primary sources or providing actual evidences or good reasons, he simply cites a long list of sensational articles published between 1899 and 1903, which mindlessly copies out the historical dossier reconstituted by Ulysses Chevalier. So this amalgamated fraudulent document. That's what people continuously cite as modern day Shroud skeptics. Okay, but this document is a fraud. There is no document that exists before the year 1900 that says what is in this written by Ulysses Chevalier. Instead, we have these two earlier folios, manuscripts, which differ with each other. Everyone admits that they just contradict each other. They say different things, and one is complete, the other is incomplete, and there are differences to them. Okay, again, that's neither here nor there for our question, but it has to be admitted that these two things are variants, and there are important differences. That may speak to, well, are they variant later copies? Why are they varying? Or what, did D'Arcis write up two different memos now? And so we have two originals? This is what Hugh needs to prove now, not just that there's one original memo, but there were two different versions of it written as rough drafts, apparently. Even as far back as 1902, credible scholars were calling out this deception of Ulysses Chevalier's amalgamated memo, where he fudged the data and combined two variant folio manuscripts. So Paul Vignon was someone who did this, and he denounced Chevalier's specious procedure, for example, forging the date of quote-unquote end of 1389 in his study, and omitting to specify that the date is his and is nowhere on the folio documents themselves. And why did Chevalier do this? Well, he had to cheat because it was a rule in academia. In order to be constituted as an authentic archive record, it had to have this date. So what did the Shroud skeptics do? As usual, they fraudulently make stuff up to suit their fancy. Okay, great. So the whole point here, though, is that it's the two folios that we need to focus on that have variations and are slightly different from the typical Shroud skeptics quotation of Chevalier's amalgamated document in 1900. What do we know about the two earlier folios? Well, these earlier variants are the only known drafts documents in existence. They are labeled folios 137 and 138 of the D'Arcis Memo in existence. And they were found by Chevalier between 1898 and 1900 in the archives of the Diocese of Troyes, which were then being maintained in the Champagne collection in the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris in France. Now, this is confirmed. These two folios do in fact exist. In fact, pro-Shroud historians and experts Brother Bruno, as well as Hilda Lenin in the 1990s, saw these with their own eyes and touched them, as I said, and read these with their own eyes. So these two earlier folios, earlier before the year 1900, do in fact exist. They weren't invented or made up by Chevalier, which he did in other cases. He just invented stuff, as we saw. Fact number 3. The very first time someone checked the Troyes diocesan archives from this area was by Canon Lalore, who, writing in the Revue Catholique du Diocèse de Troyes in 1877. So 1877 is the first time in human history that we have a mention of at least one of these two variant folio documents of the D'Arcis Memorandum. And in fact, it was basically one of them, the rough, incomplete draft, that was cited in an article by Canon Lalore in 1877. And he didn't pronounce on their authenticity. He didn't speak whether these folios were actually originals or not, and whether the information was authentic, and whether that disproved the Shroud or anything like that. Basically, it was this first mention in 1877 that sparked Chevalier to go checking into the archives 20 years later and to invent this amalgamated memo that he did with the specific purpose of discrediting the Shroud. He didn't like that in the year 1898, Secondo Pia proved the Shroud was authentic by discovering the photonegativity or semi-negativity aspect, and so he was desperate to come up with some way to disbelieve and find proof of that. And that's what seems to have prompted him to go searching and invent this document that he did from the year 1900. But great. So the point here is the two folios, the earliest we know they go back is the 19th century, just like I said on the show responding to the Godless Engineer. I was right. Hugh was wrong. 1877 is the first time in human history these folios are mentioned. Okay, again, I'm still waiting. Do you have independent proof that these date back earlier, Hugh? Okay, well, let's continue on. What do we know about these documents? Number fact. Folio 137 is the better, more refined, and complete copy. It is the only copy that has been photographed and is freely available. I included the links. And it is what basically you'll find on a Google image search today if you search for the D'Arcis Memorandum in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, France. Folio 138, the rough, incomplete copy, the one that was mentioned in 1877, has never been photographed, unfortunately. Fact number 5, Brother Bruno, as a world-renowned expert, thoroughly investigated all of the collegial church of Liry and those of the associated cities of Aube and Troyes documents in the archives with his own eyeballs and held them in his own hand. So he searched all the documents, not just the folios, every single thing that exists from the city of Troyes official archives and from the collegial church of Liry, where the Shroud was kept in particular. And he says this, both the folios are quote-unquote anonymous, unsigned, undated, and unsealed copies done on paper, lacking therefore the marks of an authentic archive document. Number 6, Ulysses Chevalier flattered himself that he could discover the finished copy of the said memorandum in the papal and or Vatican archives. But when all such efforts failed, and he had the proverbial egg all over his Shroud skeptical face, he stated that, the parchment copy kept in volume 154 of the Champagne collection was the original. So that was the first time you have a Shroud skeptic claiming they were the originals. The first thing with Ulysses Chevalier, he assumed when he saw these two folios, very interesting, he assumed they were not the originals and that the originals could be found in the papal or Vatican archives. But when they weren't there, he looked stupid and foolish. So in his desperation, he went, duh, the originals. Oh, now I can turn my brain off and be relieved. So yeah, that's the first time that they were claimed to be original. But it's important to note that the scholar who said this, remember Hugh said only a flat earth or fool conspiracy theorist like me, I'm the only one in history who's come up with this unique idea? Looks like Ulysses Chevalier initially disagreed with Hugh Farey. Very interesting. And it was only once he was disproven as a fraud and that he was wrong and foolish that he had to, on the spot, on an ad hoc basis, come up with the original. That's why they weren't in the archives. There we go. That explains it. Now, of course, as Bruno mentions, it is a paper and not a parchment. Another lie from Chevalier. Basically, he just said that because he failed to learn any humility. It gives, when you call it a parchment, it gives it an air of authenticity and stuff like that. But it wasn't a parchment. It was just a paper. Both of them were just papers, these folios. Fact number 7, there is no proof that either of the two folios are in fact probably originals, other than the one unsubstantiated claim of a biased Shroud skeptic, Ulysses Chevalier, who's a known proven fraud and engaged in the act of fraud with his amalgamated document, who was desperate not to look like the utter fool that he was when confronted with a lack of any record of the memo in the appropriate archives. And also, there's a second bit of evidence as well that they may be originals. This comes from the document title at its head, which is alleged to have been written by Bishop D'Arcis's own hand. So far, this is the only substantive evidential claim that could possibly prove it's original. Unfortunately, with this second aspect, the latter claimed evidence via the title was pointed out by Brother Bruno to be complete nonsense, because the whole question is to know whether the title really is in the bishop's own handwriting or not. And there is no proof, zip, duda, bubkiss, that the Shroud skeptic can offer to prove this claim. It is a highly controversial statement made, and the original statement itself, claiming that it was written in Bishop D'Arcis's own hand, is a highly controversial statement made by an anonymous 18th century, so in the 1700s, archivist who cataloged the manuscript. So some random archivist who know nothing, just somebody archiving the records in the 1700s or in the 18th century, said, perhaps made a mistake, but he inserted, oh, this was written in Bishop D'Arcis's own hand. No proof or evidence that he's actually right. He's just making it up, probably innocently. He probably really believed it was, given the content of the letter and the memo on these folios, but there's no proof that he's right. This could have just been a 18th century error on this random anonymous archivist's part. Finally, number 8. No trace of the memorandum is found in the Promptuarium Dioceses of the canon Nicholas Camisset. So he was writing his history of Troyes. He was a canon and archivist of the Diocese of Troyes. He was an assiduous collector of the ancient archives, especially of Troy. And even though he explicitly wrote of the Leary Church, of Henry de Poitiers, the bishop who approved the activities of Geoffrey I, and of Bishop Pierre D'Arcis himself, including his dispute on the Shroud of Turin with Geoffrey II, he totally omits the memorandum. No mention of it at all. Now, Shroud skeptics try to say, oh, well, who cares? We wouldn't expect Camisset to mention them because these were never sent in the first place. And therefore, they weren't official documents. And that's why Camisset, he knows about them, they say, right? They just make it up that he supposedly knew about it. But they say, well, he didn't record it because they weren't official archived documents that were signed, dated, and sent to the Pope. Now, I looked into this because this was one of the reasons that I was sort of skeptical about it. And I did look around, and there were people, similar writings in the 1600s and 1700s, historical writers. So here's your hint, Hugh. I'm helping you out in your research to prove your claim. As part of this challenge, Jean-Jacques Chiffolet in the 17th century, and then later in the 18th century, Francois Donat de Charnage, basically left valuable information in their books about the Shroud of Besancon. So obviously they were talking about the Shroud of Turin, but they speculated, oh, well, the Shroud of Turin is the same as the Shroud of Besancon or something like that, and they're associated, and they were getting certain details wrong in their histories. So here's the part that's specifically relevant for your challenge, Hugh. The quote from Jean-Jacques Chiffolet, written around 1624 AD, talking specifically about the Shroud of Liri Turin. And basically, he was made aware, supposedly, of the documents. So that means the papal bulls and the letter to the king and stuff like that, and of the various fallacies, as he saw them, of Pierre D'Arcis. Basically, he used the critical methods of his time to vigorously reject the unsubstantiated assertions of the supposed D'Arcis Memorandum. So it looks like Jean-Jacques Chiffolet did know about some form of the D'Arcis Memorandum, and he was not perturbed by the calumnies of its author, nor of the erroneous opinions of the anti-pope Clement. Now, here's the problem. I was not able to read what exactly does Jean-Jacques Chiffolet say about the memorandum, but it appears from everything I've been able to find that it was just vague. He had this knowledge or awareness of the incident and that there were documents surrounding it, and he seems to have an awareness that there is some kind of memorandum written by D'Arcis talking about some of these assertions. But it doesn't look like Jean-Jacques Chiffolet quotes the D'Arcis Memorandum. So we don't know it exists, let alone exists in the form, that it exists in the form as represented in the two folios, let alone the existence of the two folios themselves existed in the 1600s. As best as I can tell, and I challenge you, Hugh, to get a copy of this and quote Jean-Jacques Chiffolet explicitly when he's talking about this. This is me giving you help for your homework to meet your challenge here and fulfill your burden of proof as a Shroud skeptic for the D'Arcis Memorandum. Can you prove that, he actually is referring to the D'Arcis Memorandum as we know it today, as represented in the two folio manuscripts, and or perhaps of the two folio manuscripts themselves? He knows of their existence somehow. Can you prove that from what Jean-Jacques Chiffolet says? Everything I've been able to see is just very vague, and we don't know. He knows of some kind of vague form of the D'Arcis Memorandum and some of the main disputes and stuff like that, but it's not clear, does he know the details as outlined in the D'Arcis Memorandum as we have it today or not? And that's what I'd like you to confirm, Hugh, on your end, because I haven't been able to find it and read it for myself, what he actually says. But from everything I'm able to find from the experts who have read it, it looks like we can't prove that he does know the details, let alone that he knows about these two folio manuscripts. And that's what your claim is about. So these two folios could have been written after the 1600s still. Again, the first official mention of these two folios is 1877. So, you've got your work cut out for you. You have to prove that they're originals dating back to 1389 to 1390 with these two folio manuscripts. And that's what I've been able to find. So, good luck, Hugh. I'd love to see what evidence or reasons you have that would be acceptable to, or ought to be acceptable to, all modern secular medieval historians. All right, Huey, over to you. Get out those 16-inch big guns of yours. Let's see if you can meet the D'Arcis Memo Bibliographical Challenge.
No!